Hello, I'm Bob Scott, president of Adelphi University. Welcome to our program exploring critical issues. According to a recent Long Island Association report, Long Island's population is aging, with a higher proportion aged 65 and over than in 1980. More than 70% of Long Island's public school districts show declines in elementary school enrollments in the past 6 years. A significant share of the population lives with a sizable housing cost burden, with many spending more than 50% of their income on housing alone. Adding to this burden is the fact that Long Island has far fewer rental options than bordering regions, and those that are approved favor those aged 55 and over. A regional plan study indicates that people want mass transportation, and we are stuck in cars. To help us explore these topics about the future of Long Island, we have a panel of experts, and they are Dr. Nancy Douzinas, the Rauch Foundation, the Honorable David Kapell, former mayor of Greenport and a consultant to the Rauch Foundation, John Cameron, chairman, Long Island Regional Planning Council, and David Colone, chair, Suffolk County Planning Commission, and Jove Equity Partners. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here to talk about the future of Long Island. A group well positioned to do just that. John, what is your role relative to planning on Long Island, and what is your interest in the future of Long Island?
Well, I chair the Long Island Regional Planning Council, and it's a council comprised of at-large and elected officials on Long Island, by county officials, and we deal with issues of major planning for Long Island, looking at critical issues that affect our long-term sustainability. And we also serve as advocates for issues that affect quality of life for Long Islanders.
All right. And you come to this as an engineer, do I recall?
Yes. I also am the managing partner of Cameron Engineering and Associates, and I, humbly but proudly say next year will be our 30th year of business. So
wow,
it's been an interesting ride. But I love Long Island, as are the other individuals joining us today, and I want to find ways in which we can help to make Long Island better. And the Long Island that I knew growing up can still be there for my children and my grandchildren.
We'll return to that. Dr. Douzinas, Nancy,
yes,
welcome.
Thank you. Well, I am a psychologist by training, but I'm here today as president of the Rauch Foundation, and which is a philanthropic organization here on Long Island. We've been making grants for over 20 years. And we published, and have published for the last 10 years, the Long Island Index, which is a report card on the Long Island region, everything from education to economy to transportation, environment. We're really looking at how are we doing. We compare ourselves to other regions, and we're looking to make sure the problems are understood and how people feel. We have about the problems. We do public opinion poll almost every year. And then we delve into certain topics, each year a special topic. And we're hoping that this does lead to change, real change. Hasn't led to much change, but I think it's influenced defining the problems.
And we'll explore that some more. Mr. Mayor.
Sir.
How long were you mayor?
13 years.
All right.
The lucky number.
Dave Kapell, tell us about right.
I served in a variety of positions in village government in Greenport for 30 years, actually beginning in 1978, culminating in my period as mayor from 1994 to 2007. And during that time was heavily involved in the revitalization of the village from a what had been a profoundly depressed place to one that's now really thriving and kind of a model for a small town redevelopment. Subsequent to my retirement as mayor in 2007, I've become associated with the Rauch Foundation as a consultant, and my portfolio for the foundation includes mass transit projects, the current Long Island Water Coalition effort to address degrading water quality, and other issues related to downtown redevelopment.
David, welcome.
Thanks for having me here. It's good to be part of this conversation. I'm grew up here on Long Island and went away, came back, and now raising my 3 little kids here. So that definitely informs my vision of Long Island and my goals and hopes and dreams for Long Island. That my 3 little ones will have the same opportunities I had growing up here on Long Island, and the way I try to work on Long Island's future is through 2 different hats that I wear. And public sector hat as chair of the Planning Commission for Suffolk County, where our major focus is on building economic capacity, infrastructure, focusing on housing, transportation, and those kinds of issues that we need to build our county into the future and provide the kind of economic growth we need to have a vibrant economy and attract kids to stay here and to bring jobs here. And then in my private sector hat, I run a venture capital fund, and our focus is I invest all over the country and all over the world, but increasingly the focus is here on creating and building companies here on Long Island. So I'm excited about that new steps we're taking to try to create new companies out of research coming out of the laboratories here and research institutions here on Long Island.
Very interesting. Well, a good, interesting group, which I knew that already. So, John, is it possible that your grandchildren will have the same kind of quality of life and community that you had growing up on Long Island?
I hope so. I pray so. But candidly, we have a number of challenges here on Long Island that, frankly, if we don't deal with them, it's going to be difficult.
And what do you think of the top 3 pressing issues
I think
we need to change for your grandchildren and ours?
Well. We did, Long Island Regional Planning Council, we did a LA 2035, a 25-year sustainability plan, and we identified a number of challenges, but the top 2 that we identified were our unsustainable tax burden and the lack of diversity in housing options. That being said, in particular, lack of rental housing that's available for our young people, our young workforce, to fuel and to help grow our economy, and also for our empty nesters. The demographic which you cited earlier about Long Island's aging, and we need to have the cycling of homes and housing where people who no longer have children at home and they maybe have 4 or 5 bedroom homes can now move into multifamily homes, whether condos or rental housing, and can cycle that back into the economy so that young people can occupy those homes. But frankly, Long Island has a much lower percentage of its housing stock in rental than the surrounding suburban communities of New Jersey, Westchester, et cetera. And unless we start dealing with those issues there, we're not going to be able to have the workforce necessary to growing our economy. That being said, you asked for top 3, I'd say growing our economy. And
Right.
Dave cited I think critical issue is that Long Island's always been recognized for its educated workforce and high-tech workforce, and how we can actually help to grow the economy is, I think, to effectively to market those skills. And one thing which Long Island, I think, has not done a great job at is really taking some of our great institutions and the knowledge we have here, the skills there, and rolling it out for technology transfer.
Right.
And a lot of other areas in the country, whether it's Boston, the Northwest, California, et cetera, do a much better job. For us to be attractive for our workforce, I think we need to more effectively be able to do that.
And that lays out quite a bit for us to follow up on, but let me just ask a couple of other questions. So, Dave, what was the stimulus or the various stimuli you used to revitalize Greenport?
Well,
And is that a model for the rest of Long Island?
in some ways, yes, but every community is unique in itself, and its problems are unique, and our problems in Greenport were unique. When I took office as mayor, we were in the throes of a major scandal involving an ineffective and a bankrupting, frankly, police department. that we resolved by eliminating the department taking advantage of a obscure provision in the state constitution that entitles an incorporated village to the services of the township police department in the absence of its own. And that allowed us to do two things. It allowed us to eliminate the problem, if you will, associated with managing a department. And it also allowed us to cut our tax rate by 70%, which goes to John's remarks about taxation levels. Yeah. Today, the Greenport's tax rate today is still half of what it was when I took office in 1993. And
most of that is due to the elimination of the police department.
Most of it was. We did a lot of other, a number of other innovative things. We took advantage of. We adopted what I called a "yes in my backyard" policy, with respect to things like telecommunications facilities that nobody wanted. Nobody wanted cell phone towers. We built one. Nobody wanted generating plants. We built one. And those provide rental income to the village that helps underwrite the tax base. So it was things like that, keeping an open mind, frankly looking for things that others, for whatever reason, in their wisdom decided they didn't want, but that had value that we thought we could accommodate in an advantageous way. And we did a lot of that.
Fantastic.
The other major initiative we undertook was to once we eliminated the police department, we found ourselves with budgetary relief. We could start thinking about progressive spending, and we undertook a project to build a park in the middle of the village that's become the center of life, really, for Greenport. And in doing that, we made a very conscious decision to orient our thinking about that park from the perspective of a child. What would a kid coming to Greenport want to see when they came downtown? And we built that park according to that vision, and it really worked.
Well, that gives us, as they say, a lot to go on. David, so you must connect your public sector hat and your private sector hat in some ways.
Try to. Thankfully, they both inform each other. But let me just say one thing about Dave Kapell and Greenport, because my kids love Greenport. So he was a huge success in getting it to be kid-friendly. My kids often ask to go out to Greenport. They ride the carousel out there. and what I think Dave did in Greenport, and you're seeing it also in Patchogue with Paul Pontieri and in Port Jefferson with Mayor Garant, is have a leader who's able to articulate a vision. And that is just critical, because we need leadership. Long Island's future is in its downtowns. And Greenport was an underutilized downtown, and now it's a regional asset. Same is true, at least in Suffolk County, with Patchogue and Port Jefferson and other places. So, and Huntington as well is a real opportunity for us. In fact, talk about bringing the two hats together, Bob. Huntington is a great example of that, because we have in Huntington the emergence of a real tech cluster. A lot of new startups going in. We've invested in some and helped others get started. And what you need on Long Island, which you don't have in many places on Long Island or have not had historically, is entrepreneurial density. You go around the country and you have clusters where there's a lot of companies being formed and created, and there's a lot of ideas being shared. Long Island's 100 miles long. We're really spread out. And so to have those kind of clusters where you have a lot of entrepreneurial activity is critical. And Huntington's a great example of that. And one of the reasons that Huntington can thrive as it does is because there's sewers there. And in Suffolk County, that is a huge driver. Greenport has sewers also. But many of our downtowns where we can have opportunities and maybe create that entrepreneurial density that we don't have that much of on Long Island, we can't do in Suffolk County because of sewers. So that's a critical issue from the economic capacity perspective, infrastructure perspective, and that can help lead to economic growth and economic vitality.
The Long Island Index.
Yes.
10 years?
10 years.
Wow. What gave you the idea?
Oh, what gave us the idea? Well, it was born out of frustration of trying to make things happen on Long Island. And we said, other regions are changing, but it was a lot harder to do philanthropic work, to really get good programs and take them to scale. And this was with children and families. And we got to know Dave back then because we thought he was very enlightened in thinking about children and families. So what we did was look around the country at regions that were thriving, from Seattle to Boston to Nashville to Chicago to Silicon Valley. I mean, regions that were doing things. And it turned out that you had to have a kind of collaboration, government with business. Business had to be involved, and the nonprofit sector. And the one thing that made sense, and people on Long Island, I think you were part of it, seemed to say the idea of an index. Let's have good information for a region that doesn't have very good information about it. That's how we got started.
And we're going to come back and explore that more when we come back to exploring critical issue, this time, the future of Long Island. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our show, Exploring Critical Issues, where we are discussing the future of Long Island. So Nancy, over the past 10 years, how has the Long Island Index accounted for and reported on, provided knowledge about the issues that our colleagues have been talking about: tax burden, water quality, entrepreneurial activity?
Well, I think tax burden, we've seen the burden grow, and even compared to our neighboring regions, Long Islanders feel it more profoundly. I mean, the numbers who say it's a serious or a very serious problem, it's got to be over 60%, and it's higher than other suburban regions. Our economy has changed. Average annual wages on Long Island down compared to the rest of the country that's gone up. So there's pain. Jobs are being created no longer in manufacturing, which were high paying. It's now much more in the education and medical area. So on the positive side, though, I have to say the whole issue of developing an innovative economy is one that we did this innovation index, and the number of patents being created, some of the small business loans that are growing here. I think we said we're on the tipping point of really having a very strong, innovative economy. So that's where I see the growth, the tax revenue, the population, the young people coming from to take take Long Island,
right,
connect it to New York City, and make it a different kind of Long Island than it's been, probably with more density around certain key towns. But that's where we've got to go to have a future.
Now, what I find fascinating is that we talk about tax burden, but then we talk about economic incentives to bring in businesses which are tax abatements. And then we have apparently an obscure provision in state law that allowed a community to take an initiative. I don't understand how we can complain about the tax burden on average and then say, but you don't have to pay taxes, and you don't have to pay taxes, and you don't have to pay taxes. Doesn't that just add to the burden of the people already paying taxes?
Absolutely.
Unless
Yes.
we use
Right.
a provision which leads to the magic word consolidation.
Right.
But comment on the dilemma or the tension between tax burden and tax abatement.
For me, tax abatement can, if it's not properly applied and strategically applied, can exacerbate the problem. If one community or one business receives a reduction in their taxes, somebody else typically is going to have to shoulder that burden. The key for me is for every dollar that's invested or every dollar of tax abatement, there should be a multiplier effect. There should be exponential growth. If we can't get that, we're frankly, we're not moving ahead.
Right.
The old adage that, we can create jobs and create economic development. We can pay somebody to dig a hole, and we can pay them to fill it back up again. Well, that person got a job, and there is some form of activity there that will contribute to the economy, but we need to get multipliers. If we don't get the multipliers, then for us, it's investing in the innovation economy. into tech transfer, as David's company is doing, is to capitalize on our strengths, our assets. But we need to be able to do that at a much higher rate than we've typically been doing.
And can that be forecast? That is to say, the multiplier effect
Yes.
pretty reliably?
Yes.
The tax abatement of this sort in this?
There's a lot of historical information that's out there and anecdotal, but there's a lot of data that's out there. Nancy's group has done a lot of research on it, but absolutely there is
David looks skeptical.
Well, I agree that, if there's a multiplier, it can make sense. But remember, if someone's not paying taxes, someone else is paying more. So there's sort of a negative multiplier there too. I mean, taxation is government spending, right? It's shifting things around. So it need to be in things that have high growth potential, like John's saying. A real multiplier is important, and that is the case in some situations. But I'm a big believer in not the economic development theory of hunting and gathering, which is what you're trying to entice going out, getting companies and trying to get them here. We're a high cost area. We're a high energy cost area. That's very difficult. I'm a bigger believer in the theory of economic gardening, which is growing homegrown companies using the assets like John and Nancy were saying. In fact, Nancy and I are on the board of Accelerate Long Island, and one thing we're working on is that tech transfer. I'm doing the private sector as well, and that I think is critical. Using the assets we have to create new companies, getting companies that are here to stay here. Those are the kinds of things I think we need to focus on, and I think the idea of trying to lure other companies here is very difficult given our cost structures.
I agree, and our history. I mean, I actually did an op-ed piece in Newsday some years ago on growing our own. If you look at the history, Grumman was local, Computer Associate. Well, I guess they moved here. But there are other examples of companies that started here and grew here.
And every big company starts as a small company.
Yeah, right.
So we need more small companies, hopefully grow up to be those big companies. Some of them will and some of them won't. But if we're going to create those employers of the future, we need to start with the baby companies now.
Yeah. So Nancy, say more about the multiplier effect.
The multiplier effect?
Let's assume that our viewers don't know as much as you do, because I don't know as much as you do. So teach us.
Well, can I be specific too?
Sure, yeah.
See, I think multiplier effect, you use your assets. Assets being the research laboratories, Brookhaven National Laboratory, Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, Stony Brook, Hofstra, Adelphi, tremendous assets. Actually, if you look in the region around New York City, Long Island has more here in terms of intellectual assets than Westchester, New Jersey.
Right.
Big advantage. Is it used? Not really. There's some chances now with Accelerate and others, but how do we really use it more? What's another asset? The Long Island Railroad. Long Island Railroad, absolutely the place to build some more towns that have have apartments, address the issue of affordable housing.
Yeah, it was
young people.
Yeah, excuse me, just earlier you said something about connecting to Long Island, which I agree with, and this is what you're going to talk about.
Right.
But the irony to me is Long Island was developed to get away from New York, right? In many ways.
Right, but I would say to people, it's true, but I would say to anyone on Long Island now, take a trip up to White Plains, New York, Westchester. Stroll around, walk, see if you like it. Do you like it? Is it so bad? Does it change the suburban character of the area? Not really. Do they have good jobs? They're getting a lot of tax revenue? Are they attracting young people? Yes. Your grandchildren and your children are going to have a chance in the future. So that, use your Long Island Railroad, go places you've been scared to go, such as the third track for Long Islanders.
And what do you mean by the third track? Which is not a third rail.
No, it's not.
Politically it is.
Right. Well, we're going to overcome that.
Third track has been around 40 years. Everyone thought it will make a huge economic impact.
40 years.
40 years.
Long Island Railroad is, 100 years old?
But no, they've been talking third track.
But for 40 years.
It has made and destroyed careers, mainly destroyed. Or made in the sense of people being negative on the whole issue. But the third track actually allows for the possibility of reverse commuting. That means people move in both directions. All these research institutes, the chances they're creating business, I would guess conservatively, go up over 50%, if not more. You're talking
What goes up over 50?
chances of creating businesses on
Uh-huh.
Long Island, because you're opening, Dave actually could give you numbers for the pool of people, talent that you can get coming from other parts of New York City here, besides people here. The tax revenue, we're doing a big study this year that will come out. It's an economic impact study. And we just know already that the tax revenue, the addition to the local economy, the regional economy, are going to go up in the billions.
Wow. So, David, what are some of those? By the way, what I'm envisioning is we're losing young people to New York City, to Brooklyn and other locations, but with the third track, they'll be able to come back out here to work in the new businesses we're going to create, which we hope then will lead to new housing. But give us the numbers.
Well, the 2013 Long Island Index report found that, or special analysis found that third track would open up over 500,000 potential employees for Hicksville and Mineola alone.
Good heavens.
Yeah, I mean it'll have an enormous impact. But if I can break this down for a minute to
sure.
kind of a personal story and anecdote. I have a 35-year-old son who's he's right in the vein of what Dave's been talking about. He's a highly accomplished computer software engineer employed by one of the big companies now, and lives in Brooklyn. He's at a point in his career where he's looking to make a change, both in terms of employment and in terms of housing. And everything in his thinking, I've been closely working very close. Obviously, he's my son, so I'm close to him. But all of his thinking, both about employment and about housing, relate directly to mobility. And when I say mobility, I mean without a car. He owns a car. He barely uses it. He goes everywhere by train in New York. And he has considered significant employment opportunities on Long Island with the idea of continuing to live in New York, in Brooklyn, and commuting, but it's just not feasible. So I've experienced this on a personal level, and I think the problem we've got, in a nutshell, is that the perception for young people is that Long Island is a place to leave.
Not live, but leave.
Yes.
How do you reverse that? This may be presumptuous on my part, but I relate it back to what I said about Greenport. Was we decided, in terms of our little village, that we were going to focus our thinking around what little kids would want. Long Island needs to start thinking seriously about what people my son's age want in terms of a place to live and work. And we're just not doing that effectively. And one of the key ingredients, the key ingredients are an interesting place to live and a good way to get around. And it all breaks down, unfortunately, at the local level around NIMBY. And a third track is a perfect example. Here you have a condition that was put in place in 1844 when the railroad, and people don't realize this, but those two tracks that exist in that 11-mile stretch are the same two tracks that were installed in 1844 when the population of Long Island was 50,000. Here we are 170 years later, same two tracks, 3 million people living on Long Island, and we can't get out of our seats to do anything about it. I mean, this is a profound leadership problem and goes to the very heart of the dilemma on Long Island, which is that the fragmentation of government and the way our politics operate stop anything grand from happening on the order of what happened years ago that made Long Island what it is now. And
that is an important point. And we'll come right back to it after we take a quick break, and we'll be back with more exploring critical issues, the future of Long Island. Welcome back to Exploring Critical Issues, where we have been discussing the future of Long Island. Helping us to discuss this topic, we have a panel of experts, and they include Dr. Nancy Douzinas, the Rauch Foundation, the Honorable David Kapell, former mayor of Greenport and a consultant to the Rauch Foundation, John Cameron, chairman, Long Island Regional Planning Council, and David Colone, Chair, Suffolk County Planning Commission and Jove Equity Partners. When you talk with such passion, no, it's important, and it's a complex topic. So say some more about. And John, why don't you, from your perspective on the issue of transportation and the railroad, how do we, 170 years later, catch up?
Dave brought up the issue, and we were discussing the details of the third track and another project on Long Island, which is in sort of the infant stages. The second track, which will allow Farmingdale to Ronkonkoma to allow reverse commuting, but also to allow a lot more train service heading out east. But a major project, really the largest project the MTA's moved forward with maybe in its history, is the multi-billion-dollar East Side Access Project. And I actually had a little over a month ago, had the opportunity to tour the construction down the tunnels below Grand Central Station. What that project's going to enable Long Island to do, and Long Island is really the principal beneficiary of that, if we take advantage of it, is to allow a lot of our potential workers that work on the east side of Manhattan, where typically in the past they would have to travel to Penn Station, then come cross town to get across town to move up on the Upper East Side. Now we're going to be able to have access into Grand Central Station and the tremendous amount of growth potential in New York City. But if we don't have the third track, and if we don't also capitalize on creating transit-oriented development in our hubs, as Nancy was alluding to, in our transit-oriented communities there, we're not going to be able to fully capitalize. That would be a poor investment, a multi-billion-dollar investment that would really, frankly, be wasted if Long Island doesn't take advantage. It is a major opportunity for us to increase our employment, to have a lot more of the workforce from Long Island work in Manhattan, work on the Upper East, work on the East Side, frankly, as well as to be able to facilitate economic development in our downtowns. So we need to take advantage of that, and the only way it really is third track, second track, and also transit-oriented development in our rail communities.
So with such enthusiasm and a compelling argument, what could possibly stand in the way?
Well, local zoning for one, local zoning, and
Local
frankly,
zoning?
that's an issue which really is affecting the density in the downtowns. Density is directly related to affordability, and Dave brought up the issue of sewers. We need to create sewers in a number of these areas, in particular in Suffolk County. But we need also to be able to have the support of our local leaders. In order to get the support of local leaders, we need to have an educated populace. And frankly, the more that they start to learn that we're not sustainable here on Long Island, we need to grow our tax base. If we don't grow our tax base, the tax rates have to go up because the costs are inevitably going up.
So how do we do this, David?
We've been one of the roles of the county planning commissions, and one we've been working on in Suffolk County is to work with the towns on creating model zoning codes. So we worked, Brookhaven Town, which is our largest town in Suffolk County, has really been the leader on this. They've just passed the first multifamily code that we've seen on Long Island, at least in Suffolk County. And what we're doing now is working with that to try to take that to the other towns. And what multifamily means is just not your single family home. As
Right.
been pointed out earlier, we have a real lack of rental housing, a real lack of non-single family homes. We have half of what compatible or similar areas like
I think it's
Westchester
something
and
like
Jersey.
a third of Westchester,
Well,
isn't it?
yeah, they have a third, but we have half of that. So we have
Yeah.
somewhere in the teens,
Right.
and they have a low 30s.
Yeah, okay.
So bottom line is, if you take that as sort of the typical, we have half of what we need, and we need to do it near transit because that avoids the whole issue of Kapell's son having to get a car and all that. But look, bottom line is we're an island, and we can't continue to grow out. We got to grow in on those downtowns, in around those transit hubs. Otherwise, we're going to sprawl ourselves into just a traffic mess. Another thing we don't have very adequate system for is buses here on Long Island. We have we talked about some of the shortcomings of the train, and one of the biggest shortcomings is they're all east-west, and they were made to connect with the city, and they don't necessarily even do a good job of that. But we particularly don't have a very good system of moving people north and south on Long Island. Now, our county executive Steve Colone has put together the Connect Long Island plan to help run some bus rapid transit north-south. We also have some new private sector initiatives like 7 Bus, which are trying to develop a bus system that actually works and can feed the job centers throughout Long Island.
You know, you speak about transportation here at Adelphi. Of our 8,000 students, I guess we have about 6,800 in Garden City. Our university-operated transportation system moved 400,000 riders last year.
Wow.
Between Garden City and the train stations and the bus stations and the Roosevelt Mall. 400,000 riders.
Wow.
So why was the railroad started in 1844? What was the impetus?
Well, it was the inland route between New York and Boston.
Yes.
People don't realize that.
What?
Yeah. Yes. That
This
was
is
it.
it's a little, talk about obscure.
You're right.
But I'm well aware of it because it had a lot to do with Greenport's history. They didn't have the engineering capacity apparently in the 19th century to bridge the rivers and the gorges in Connecticut on the way up to Boston from New York. So in the alternative, they built the Long Island Railroad from Brooklyn originally. Actually, it didn't start in Manhattan, it started in Brooklyn, out to Greenport. Greenport was the terminus of what now is the main line and was the first rail line. And at Greenport, the passengers and freight disembarked and transferred to a steamship across Long Island Sound to Connecticut and then back on the train to Boston. And that arrangement continued until just after the turn of the century, when the inland route was connected. And that really is why Greenport boomed the way it did in the second half of the 19th century. It was a major transportation hub. Still is, but not on the order that it was. So that's why it was built, and that presaged everything that's occurred subsequently in terms of development of the island.
So the index provides, through research and discussion, a body of knowledge that other people can use for advocacy and planning.
Right.
To try to put this into effect. Can you quantify from the analysis what the negative consequences are to the third track?
Oh, I don't see any. I mean, in negative, I think it's simply the challenge to make it happen, but those people who are opposing it the most are the ones who will be direct beneficiaries.
But in other words, I think there are people who believe that there are some private homes that would be
there
taken.
There are a few. Well, Dave
private
knows
property.
more about
De minimis.
that.
Well,
Yeah.
I think, look, it's it'll have an impact on the communities that directly abut third track. You can't get away from that.
Yeah.
That's reality. But there are ways to mitigate those impacts that, unfortunately, the first time around on the project, which was 5 years ago, were not adequately considered, in my view. And I think one of the challenges for those of us that are trying to reinvigorate the project is to promote a public process for redesign of the project that would take those considerations into account because they're legitimate. I mean, somebody who backs up on the railroad right of way, I mean, I can sympathize with them.
Yeah.
But you can't have 11 miles of neighbors hold Long Island hostage, which is essentially what's occurring now. And so, you need public officials that are willing to lose an election if necessary, if that's what it takes to get something done. I mean, we've lost track of that in this country in general. Same thing's happening in Washington. Public officials are so...
One interesting thing, looking around the country at how other regions have solved problems, Silicon Valley, and as Dave knows, really developed a common zoning code for, it was 4 counties,
Bunch of cities.
a whole bunch of cities. I mean, big areas. They all adopted the same code. Even in Boston, which is even, it's another home rule state and all the localities, they came together around affordable housing and created a compact that allowed them to build it. So we've got to be able to come together, I think, and agree on bigger things.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that for our children and grandchildren, for them to be able to live here,
If
work here.
Right now, there's no consequence to the towns not doing that. And there's sometimes there's lip service, particularly at election time, about those kinds of things. But without actually having, as Nancy points out, zoning codes that they can pull off the shelf and then apply to particular pieces of land, because there's two steps here. You got to have zoning, and you got to then apply it to a particular piece of land, around transit or wherever you want to do it. But without the will to actually apply it, we're not going to get anything done. Now, one thing we've talked about in Suffolk County a little bit is because sewers are a critical piece of this, tying sewer financing to requiring any town or village that does make that zoning change. So right now, there's no carrot. There's nothing other than, hey, you should do this for the good of the region, and maybe it'll help your local tax base. But there's no regional thinking in terms of infrastructure right now. I think that's something that we've talked a bit about more recently, and hopefully we can move towards regional infrastructure funds that, infrastructure used to be funded, as Dave points out, he talked about Washington. Infrastructure used to be funded by Washington and Albany. We can't rely on Washington. We can't rely on Albany anymore. We got to have our own locally controlled funding for infrastructure that we can then incentivize towns and villages to change that zoning code, because we'll get you money for roads, we'll get you money for sewers if you'll do that.
But can you make the case that it is for your children and grandchildren?
Absolutely is.
Because those three issues, right? Jobs,
Otherwise,
housing,
the numbers
and transportation are all connected.
The numbers are daunting. That, frankly, if you look at the escalating percentage of even just property taxes as relates to median income, we did that as part of the LI 2035, and it's approaching 10% of average median income for property taxes, that being in one of the highest tax states in the country, one of the top two in the country. So that burden is, as Nancy said, is totally unsustainable. And frankly, people have to be educated. Look and say, the exit of our young people, whether it's postgraduate graduation from college, or even just our younger workforce, or even in the blue-collar workforce, they can't afford to live here anymore. And we need to deal with this. But Dave was talking about, with the zoning codes, et cetera, that I think that if we look and say, what do we need to do? What are some of the solutions? That I think that if you had overlay zones in the downtowns where the developers not only saw that at the end of the day what I can get, but there'd be some certainty of outcome, but also of the process. And we typically, government has abused the secret process, which is this environmental review process, to basically kill projects. And we need to have a much bigger conversation about this, where we have one community at a time, basically killing development here on Long Island.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back to continue our discussion about the future of Long Island. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Exploring Critical Issues, where we are discussing the future of Long Island. So, John, in making the case, I would think that we could, here we have 7 million people, presumably, who are watching this, or at least it's in 7 million households. Can't we make the case that it's in your family's self-interest? So that your children and grandchildren can have opportunities here the way you've had?
Yes, even if you don't want to look at it altruistically, if like I said, in your individual self-interest, is that my generation, the baby boomers, they're not getting younger, getting older. And that's going to put greater burdens on our healthcare system. And frankly, they're not going to be, you have a lot of people are going to be retiring. And so they're not going to be contributing to the economy, the local economy, to help grow the tax base. So if they're going to start taking more of the public services, that's going to put more of a burden on those that are working. And frankly, the workforce is going to be our children and ultimately our grandchildren here. And the tax burden that's there, if we don't grow the tax base, then the numbers are not going to work.
Right. I believe Dave early on mentioned water, but only once did we talk about water. And it seems to me that's got to be a critical part of the infrastructure that David talks about, right?
Yeah, particularly on the east end of Long Island, it's not just critical just for our drinking, but it's also critical for our economy, right? The fact that we actually have low low water costs, as well as we have a whole huge industry, our tourism industry, dependent upon water quality. Never mind our farming. I mean, people sometimes forget, but Suffolk County is by revenue the largest agricultural county in New York State.
Yes.
That's only and talk about the jobs and the quality of life that drives. That's dependent upon good water, and there's a balance there. But tourism, agriculture, and just the fact that we have plentiful water is unique, actually, competitive advantage nationwide. I do business in other parts of the country where they're talking about water shortages. How do we deal with
my heavens,
water?
yeah,
and that kind of stuff.
Southwest.
So we may not have a lot of competitive advantages in some ways, but in other ways we do. Water and our intellectual assets, like Nancy was talking about earlier. So,
And if
we protect those.
And you say we need sewer developments. Doesn't that have a consequence for water too?
Absolutely. I mean, the problem we're seeing, particularly in Suffolk County, is that the water quality has been degrading over the last 20 years as the population has increased. So what we don't have in Suffolk County is enough sewer systems to treat the water that our large population has been affecting. So we need sewers in order to grow, because we can't add more density unless we have sewers, and that becomes sort of the linchpin for new development in Suffolk County is sewers, and that's why we need infrastructure financing. And like I said, it ain't coming from elsewhere. It's got to come from us, and it's got to come in a regional way.
And that'll help the water quality, presumably, because it'll stop the
That's what it's for. Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
right,
That's
yeah.
the purpose of the sewers is to make sure that the water is treated and goes back into our water underneath our feet. You know, Long Island's one of the only places in the country where our water we walk on every day. It's right under our feet. So the stuff we're putting in our soils, we end up drinking at some point in the afternoon.
But on the question of water quality, it's another issue that really requires a regional perspective, and that's what the foundation is involved in funding a project that would accomplish two things if successful. One is to address the sources and mitigate the sources of pollution, but also to create a structure for regional management of the aquifer, because it's the same body of water that serves all of us, from Brooklyn out to Montauk Point.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's actually very interesting. It's a coalition of 5 environmental groups. Nature Conservancy, Pine Barrens, Group for the East End,
Citizens Campaign.
Citizens Campaign, and
Stony
Stony
Brook.
Brook University. That's what Long Island's got to do. That's what we've got to do, work
Collaborate.
together and collaborate.
Right.
This coalition, they're figuring it out. You have to, when you give a grant, it's to all of them, and they're driving it. That's what Long Island's got to figure out a way to do that.
And that's a great example of using our intellectual assets as
right.
well. We have Stony Brook and others
Right.
who really are doing cutting-edge research. Cornell is involved as well. Cutting-edge research on water quality right here on Long Island. Helps us, but it also might be skills and knowledge that we can take elsewhere. And places like John's company, are putting in cutting-edge treatment facilities and infrastructure. That's stuff, knowledge and know-how we're developing right here on Long Island.
You know, it sounds as if what we're saying in a lot of ways is that all of us need to think about our community as Long Island instead of our community as only our neighborhood.
Exactly right. I use the analogy. I say that it's a big boat, and we're all in the same boat together. And to think that we just start throwing people overboard because the boat's getting too heavy, we need to work together. Need to be rowing in the same direction. Otherwise, we're not going to get there. So hopefully, people start thinking of it a little more collaboratively, collectively, that we need to really deal with our challenges together, and we can't be, driven by self-interest, because ultimately, even your self-interest, you're going to be impacted.
But maybe we don't have the vision of a single community because we have so many different governmental entities
Definitely.
with self-interests and self-perpetuating.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, right.
Well, that's really goes to the essence of the problem. Is that you have a lot of public officials who are really interested in preserving the status quo, which in most cases is minuscule as compared to the region. And the challenge for us is to find ways to convince people to take chances now and then towards a long-term goal, such as third track, transportation alternatives, drinking water quality,
Housing,
downtown
rental housing.
I mean, they all go to the same problem, which is that people need to be willing to look forward instead of looking inward all the time.
Has there been much progress? It seems to me that about 10 years ago, Newsday had a 25th anniversary edition on the future of Long Island and an assessment of what had happened. If we now look back to that 10 years ago, are there, well, we've had some examples of progress.
The innovation economy.
Yeah.
And the collaboration around that.
Right.
I think most of us would rather look forward for the next 10
Well,
years.
yes, I agree.
With the hope
Yeah.
that we won't replicate
Yeah, right.
the past 10 years, because I think, one of my favorite adages, again, the best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Yes,
and
right.
I think
Right.
we ought to start planting today. We need it. So.
Well, we're all involved in planning in one way or another, but planning finds its reason in doing, and I think you're starting to see doing an action that makes a difference. But we're not going to be measured across the months. The progress is going to be measured across the years. But as John said, no better time to start than the present. But I think because of places like the index, we now have data that informs what our problems are, and the Rauch Foundation has done a number of other things, like creating a leadership class through Energia and other things like that, to create people who are educated on Long Island. You have a regional planning council that has really been revived and become a regional leader under John's leadership that I don't think you had quite that in the past. So the regional thinking and the conversations that we're having now, and even some of the implementation, whether it's creating the first multifamily code. We actually in Suffolk County got all the towns together to do the same solar installation code, because we thought energy is an important part of our regional future. It took a lot of effort, but all the towns wound up passing the same permitting process. We put together a permitting portal so that everyone knows where their applications are and going through the county process. These are small steps, but they're important steps.
Absolutely.
To create a more efficient and more unified region.
Why did you come back to Long Island?
I came back for a couple of reasons. We actually, talk about Brooklyn, we lived in Brooklyn after we lived elsewhere and then lived in Brooklyn after we got married. And then when my daughter was born, when she turned about 6 months old, our little basement apartment in Brooklyn got really, really small, really, really fast, and she was crawling all around. But where did we move back to on Long Island? We moved back to a downtown, Babylon, because it felt like it had energy, and it was you were able, right near a train. I could walk to the train station. And eventually, we moved a little further out for a little more room. But Long Island's an exciting place to be. It's where I grew up, and it's where I hope my kids will have opportunities. But we need to be working together to make sure that happens.
Right. So what's the future topics for the Long Island Index?
Oh, that's truthfully unknown at the moment. We're thinking about January and transportation and parking. But beyond that, we're doing our own assessment of the investment we've made and where we should put our effort now.
What was the impetus to create the Long Island Regional Planning Council? And
I think the impetus goes way back, where it was the Long Island Regional Planning Board, and then as we reconstituted, was that we could actually take other funding from different sources, et cetera. But I think ideally, it was created recognizing that Long Island is one large community, is that with the 97 villages, 13 towns, two cities, and 2 counties, is that we are the personification of balkanization and parochialism, if you will. But absolutely, I think if there was one example that probably as a learning moment was Sandy, that everybody looked around and said, we really are one island, because there was no community that could take care of themselves solely by themselves. We were dependent upon each other. And hopefully we learn from that, and we say, we really need to work together if we really are going to be here for the future for our children and grandchildren.
right. The final thoughts? If you were czar, I know what you do.
I don't want to be czar.
I know what you do.
I think another issue we need to deal with is equity, quite frankly. I mean, Long Island's a great place to live if you're well off, and it's certainly a challenging place if you're working class, but it's darn near impossible if you're poor. And so all the things we're talking about, I think, need to also keep in mind sort of how it impacts the different classes we have on Long Island, because it impacts us in different ways.
See, I think that's what is hopeful about building some bigger towns, and that is that you're going to get a real mixture of people. You get all, I assume, classes. You're going to get a greater mixture, and that starts changing the dynamics. It gives people opportunities.
I agree. We've been talking about a regional community. A community is a form of a compact, almost a covenant between and among those who make it a vibrant area for living. We can be sustainable if all do their part in contributing to the benefit of the whole. Community development is a moral enterprise, and we ignore the moral and ethical dimensions at our peril. Please help. And thank you for watching Exploring Critical Issues. I want to thank our panelists. I'm Bob Scott. See you next time.